Hello and welcome to the Be More Connected Summit. Today, our guest is Thérèse Cator. Therese is a lifelong artist, leadership coach, intuitive healer, and soul guide whose work lies at the intersection of leadership, spirituality, reclamation, and social change. Hello, Therese, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Elise. I'm really excited for our conversation and whatever is going to be unfolding.
Yes, thank you. We shared your bio here, but in your own words, could you share a little bit with us about the work that you do in the world?
Yeah, the work that I do in the world, it's really evolved. My background is in science, engineering, and math. Like my parents put me in that kind of like rigorous background, my immigrant parents. However, ever since I was a little child, I was always exposed to the arts. I was dancing and I was singing and doing all drawing, making clothes, everything. So to me, the first way I always identify as an artist. And then everything that I do, whether it's healing work, whether it's coaching work, it's art.
Beautiful.
I approach it through that lens of art, and it keeps it fun for me, I guess. So my work combines leadership and how we can lead in a way that not only is individualistic, but is taking into account the whole to create a world that we truly want to see. And to me, I think a lot of that is going back to reclaiming who we are, reclaiming our whole selves. So that's like in a nutshell. Like I'm really passionate about helping women and women identified folks reclaim their whole selves, because I believe once we're able to bring and be with our whole selves, then we're able to affect even more change.
Beautiful. And could you share a bit about what that process of reclamation looks like when working with your community?
Yeah, sure. I actually have a program specifically for that. It's actually a year-long program called Circle of Reclamation. And it combines coaching as well as emotional healing. So we look at a big part of it, actually every other month, we look at specific emotions that our society says, don't look at that. So emotions like grief, like fear, like shame, we spend time diving deep into those emotions and honoring those emotions, and then from there seeing what the lessons are underneath. Because once we're able to be with that emotion, be with whatever shame, for example, if it's shame, whatever shame is trying to teach us, then we're able to integrate it, and then it's not impacting our lives to that degree anymore. It's not holding power over us. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yes. And you stated earlier that it is so supportive for our individual and collective well-being to be able to recognize some of the ways that we're not reclaiming or honoring our whole selves. And is this a process that you experienced in your own journey of healing? And how may that have influenced the work that you do today?
Yeah, it definitely is something that's influenced my own healing. The way that I came into this kind of work is actually because I was in a really terrible institution in a school situation that basically was racist. Like I'm not gonna sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And that led me to deal with those circumstances. I remember a friend of mine gave me these personal development CDs and I started listening to them. And from there, I was like, okay, this is making me feel better. I'm able to cope in this situation. So I went along that path.
Mm.
And, you know, as I was going along that path, there were some things that just totally weren't gelling, because I felt wellness, personal development, it just doesn't take into account the systems that we live under.
Right.
What the disparities, right? This is not by accident, it's actually done on purpose. So it wasn't taking that into account. And then me, my identity as a Black woman in America, when I was in LA, actually in 2013, yes, it was in the fall of 2013, I experienced, along with my husband, we experienced racial profiling by the police.
Wow.
And that incident, we were actually stopped, and it became a really terrible and big situation. When I say really big, we had guns pointed behind our backs. There were helicopters flying above. And I should have said, like, a content warning for anyone who can be really triggered by that, because so pause it right now. I'm sorry I didn't give that content warning. But going on with the story, it was a really big thing that happened to
Absolutely.
us. And so for me, the healing had to go deeper.
Mm.
And what I found was that the intersections of who I was, you know, being a woman and also being a Black woman, what that was is not being served. It still isn't, for the most part, being served. So I had to do my own healing. And a lot of that work was reclamation work around who I am as a woman, reclaiming all different, you know, from my hair to the way, you know, my features, to my body, to relationship with sexuality and sensuality, just spirituality, looking at all those areas where colonization, slavery, etc., has impacted, and dismantling that internalized oppression within me. And, you know, I feel that I had, in terms of my childhood, my mom, she was an activist. Like, every weekend, she had us at our rally. She had us stuffing envelopes. Like, we were doing that pretty much every weekend during my childhood growing up. So I was very aware of, like, that of the disparities of the discrimination. I was aware. However, what I feel is that in a lot of my life, because I had and I have intellectual privilege that put me in white spaces, and it was like, oh, okay, even though you're Black, you're accepted because you have, you know, intellectual privilege. We're able to extract this part of you that's very valuable to us. It shielded a lot of things that I could have experienced. Sure. So this was, you know, such a really big experience for me. And I was like, okay, I had to do my own healing work to really go deeper, because I wasn't finding it out there. People were like, what are you talking about? So that's the short end of that journey.
Sure. A truly transformative moment in your journey. And so there's so much that you brought up that was connected to that story. And I think what resonated the most for me is that the dominant culture, even in pockets and communities where we're speaking about healing and we're speaking about wellness, is only scratching the surface and not allowing us to actually go deeper and understand in a more true and authentic way how to get in touch with the parts of ourselves that are being continually oppressed by the systems that we live under. And it is so powerful and so important that there are women like you in the world that are stepping forward and taking on and calling in other women to join in these efforts and in this movement, and allowing and creating spaces for the healing to go so much deeper.
Yeah, I think earlier on it was just like not, there's a invisibility in those spaces. And I want to even say in terms of being supported by, supported when you experience trauma, race-related trauma, like that doesn't even exist in therapy, really. That's not a mainstream even for therapy. So there's not many outlets for that. And for me, what I felt was that it was something that was not allowed to be talked about for a long time. I feel like right now it's more coming up to the consciousness. And you could say, like, even saying white and black, it's like, oh my gosh, you're saying like, we're not all one, like you're, so there was a lot, I feel like a lot of gaslighting even earlier on. I feel now in a lot of spaces, people are like, okay, waking up, but there's still a lot more to do, because when you walk as a Black woman walking into those spaces, I can't think of one space that I have been in, whether it's training, not even one. And it's, whether it's training, whether it's just a circle, if it's run by a white presenting person, or even if it's not, if there are also white people in the space, some harm has occurred. And when I'm like, I'm really trying to go back and like think, okay, has there ever been a space that that hasn't occurred? And when I say harm, it could be microaggressions, such as like when I was in training coaching school, there was one other Black woman, and we got mixed up all the time. Like people would call me her name. Like it was only two of us. Come on. Right. Okay. And we look nothing alike. So, and I know that people might be like, well, it's actually a microaggression. And it's like, literally, you're not able to see two Black women and be able to differentiate them, even though they look, height, weight, everything it's completely different. We don't even look like we can be sisters. Right. So it was, just even in that space, there was that going on. And I remember I had done a retreat, and although that I was the lead teacher on the retreat, and the other teacher, she was a white woman, I remember we were having a conversation. We were at the retreat having a conversation with this white couple, and they couldn't get it that I was also leading the retreat. Like it was, and I just like fell back. I was like, they're just not going to get it. They couldn't understand. They were like, you're participating? And I'm like, no, I'm a teacher.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, but it was just this weird thing. Wow. And they couldn't get it. And they were from America. Sure. So they couldn't understand, put two and two together, that a Black woman was leading a retreat. And this was a retreat that it was a mixed retreat with all different races. So on top of that, like, they couldn't get it. So those things happen all the time.
Even in spaces where people are investing in healing and supposedly conscious. Sure. Yeah. And so in those spaces and in those moments, how do you prioritize your self-care and then continue to serve as a leader in that role? That must be something that's challenging when presented with this conundrum, because you want to be in a space where those individuals still potentially feel welcome to participate and join, but calling them in a way where their prejudice, their bias, their inability to even understand that a Black woman could be in a teaching position.
Yeah, that's
Those power dynamics that are at play. How do you navigate that, and how do you continue to show up as the healer that you are in those kinds of situations?
Yeah, you know what, and last year, one of the decisions that I made is actually not to put myself in that position to be in. Obviously, if I'm running a retreat, that's different, and I run into people who are not even part of it and they're not understanding. That's part of walking in this body, in this world. However, if I am going to go into a space as an attendee, I have a certain list of requirements for me to come as an attendee. And one of those requirements is actually the person holding space. I know it's not going to be perfect all the time. However, it's important to me that the person holding space understands these dynamics, and especially if they're a white person, that they are doing anti-racism work. Because if they're not, they're just like, oh, I understand it from the mind without actually digging in and doing the hard work of looking at themselves, and not, racism is not out there, it's in here, looking at in there, then it's always going to create a dynamic where a person of color, or, you know, if it's me coming in, is going to be harmed. So I just decided, for my own well-being, for my own sanity, I'm going to be even more discerning about the spaces that I go into for that reason.
So important. And what would you say are some of your most challenging moments, but also some of your proudest moments around building a healing-centered community, particularly for women of color?
Proudest moments, I feel, is every time there's any kind of transformation. Anytime I see a woman, regardless of however she identifies, reclaiming a part of herself that has been silenced by either the dominant culture, by patriarchy, by, you know, family, by work, by partners, because the way that we're silenced is, as women, it's in so many ways. It's in so many ways. So anytime that I see a woman truly expressing herself and standing in her power, that's exciting. That's like, oh, it's worth it. Because when she's able to do that, you know, when any woman is able to do that, she's able to affect change, not only in her home, but also in her community and through other people who come and interact with her. Like, we are the change agents. Like, we're looking outside a lot of times for the change, but we are the change agents, because as women, we are the emotional, like, the holders of space. Just think space. Just think as, you know, the great mother, like our Mother Earth. And she's able to hold all of this, all of us within it. And women, we are able to be those containers. And those containers, it doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. It doesn't mean that you're taking in other people's stuff. But in terms of the role and the creativity that's within being a woman, or a woman identified person.
And
challenges, you asked me.
The challenges.
The challenges, I'm like, I really have to think, like, what are the challenges? I felt like I had more challenges like working a corporate job. But I feel like, honestly, the challenges are, it's not so much in the work with clients. The challenges is, you know, in this society, I feel that, you know, as a Black woman, a lot of times the work that we do aren't seen. Actually, I had posted several weeks ago, literally, I have had conversations with numerous coaches and people within this industry who are Black. and they have had to leave the industry because they're not able to make a living. Okay, they haven't been able to make a living, yet their work gets remixed or appropriated by, you know, white women and non-Black women as well. And and that's what happens. So they're not getting necessarily the coverage in a paper or a magazine. And yet, if someone else does it that is more palatable to what our dominant culture likes and wants to see, then those people get those opportunities, even though it's not necessarily work that comes from their lineage or didn't come from them. They learned it from a Black woman and then took it.
And in those kinds of scenarios, are you seeing that is becoming something that there's pushback around now, that there's any amount of accountability around it? Or do you think that this is something that's going to continue to be on the rise?
Well, I think the way the accountability is like by even saying it, and it's not necessarily, I mean, everyone can make their choice as to if they're going to say the name of, you know, say someone's direct name. Everyone has the right to make that choice. However, I think being able to speak it and say, you know what, Black women and also women of color, because are here. We're here. We are part of, and you know, we are part of this. And not only part of it, our lineages actually are the source of what is being taught. So, you know, just really saying the truth out loud, because this conversation is something I've had for the past decade, and I just said it out loud like a few weeks ago. So it's like literally releasing what's being held here in our throats and in our hearts, because I can't tell you one person I have spoken to that hasn't said something along those lines, like, oh yeah, my work, someone takes it and they take a little piece and then boom, they're on X magazine or they're being featured on this big platform.
Right. And it is such a it's such a frustrating experience to know that there are Black women and women of color who have been doing this work and are doing this work, and that the recognition is not there, but someone who looks differently, who is more palatable, can take that same content, take that same material, and have a completely different experience and have access to different doorways. And
yeah, make a living, right? Because it's literally taking, because what I said in that post is like, it's really literally taking food out of children's mouths. Like, it's stealing, literally.
And in the work that you are doing now in empowering women and focusing on embodied manifestation, in what ways do you work to allow women to tap into some of this ancestral, some of these beautiful practices that have been carried along through the lineages of Black women and other women of color?
You know what? I think a lot of it is speaking to elders. You know, I've been spending a lot of time, even for years now, just like speaking and being around elders. And if a woman has that ability, like if you do have someone in your family who is an elder and that has memories of, you know, a time before, or even just little golden nuggets, because you never know what golden nuggets you'll get. And like, what did you do? Like, if someone had a fever, like, what would you do? And from that question, you can learn about, oh, this was the medicine that was used in our family when people had a fever. So just asking questions to elders, I think is powerful. And and also because there's an immediate leaning towards of, okay, let me find out what my ancestry is. Like, let me get the science. Let me get the science. However, we have to remember with people of color, and regardless of where you're from actually, that a lot of the history was oral. So things are carried on through orally because, number one, if you wrote it down, that could have been your life. So being able to speak to elders and see about spirituality, about medicine, about what their upbringing is like, and that gives you clues as to, and sometimes not clues, it can give you literally information as to what was done within your lineage.
Which can be such a supportive source of inspiration and guidance, particularly in our current culture where we've been so distanced and so disconnected from those ancestral healing traditions.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just been really talking to like my mom and my aunts who, like my mom, she had shared with me of a grieving ritual of like what they did when her father, my grandfather, passed away long before I was born. And, they sat all night. And it was an entire grieving ritual. And I wouldn't be able to find that in a book. If I got a DNA test, I wouldn't be able to know that. However, through speaking through our elders and connecting with our stories, like knowing what the stories are, it's really important in helping us reclaim and connect to those healing practices.
Beautiful. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about how the practices that you use, that you particularly teach and offer and share, how they can be supportive of folks who may be experiencing stress, overwhelm, who may be having challenges with setting boundaries and potentially overextending themselves, serving others before remembering to fill their own cup.
Yeah, I think the practices that I use, meditation, breath work, and really being in our bodies, whether it's through movement, it's all a remembering. It's all of a coming home. So breath work, what I personally love breath work. It's one of my practices that I use within my personal practice, and I love teaching it, and I incorporate it in pretty much all the programs that I do because it allows you to bypass the thinking mind, the mind that's like, oh, trying to figure it out, and get into your body, and it's through your breath. So using your breath, that's the first thing. That's life. Your breath is connected to your life. It's connected to source. And I often think about our breath. It's the first and the last, right? It's first introducing life, and the last when we leave this life and enter a new life. That's what I believe. So we're connecting with this part of us that's at the root of who we are. So I practice breath work. Meditation has been my practice, and I've been practicing breath work for a long time, at some forms of breath work for probably 20 years. And then I practice meditation. literally sitting meditation, which is hard. However, what it does is it's a remembering once again that we are all connected and that we are not this body. Like, this body is, of course, to help us, assist us in this life, fulfilling our purpose, and yet we're also something greater. And also it's a way to quiet, to let go and quiet the mind, and really, once again, get into our bodies, get into our hearts. Because to me, the practice is always coming back into our hearts, coming back into who we are inside of here. What is it that we truly desire? What is our soul telling us that we need to do? What is the medicine? What is the magic? What is it that we're supposed to bring forth in the world? And really connecting with that and allowing ourselves to release it. Because I think, especially for women, because of all the conditioning that we can experience, releasing those gifts and really allowing ourselves to, okay, take up space can be hard. So these practices, to me, allow us as women to take up space. And that is, I know you had asked a little bit about embodied manifestation, but that allows us to space to receive, because we're master givers. Most of us can identify with being master givers. However, how good are you at receiving and allowing yourself to receive? And that's how we can create something new for ourselves.
Beautiful. And what is your vision for a world where women are more empowered and have that ability to receive and share of their gifts?
Yeah, my vision is a community-centered world. And I say community, like community to me means like how, even the way that we live, like I was raised within a community, like at any given time, there was like between 8 and 15 people in our home. So yeah, it's a lot. And then on top of that, there was always people around. Like it was just community. We were raised around community. And even now I feel we don't have that many people in our home anymore. I live here with my husband and my child. Even the way we live, if we're really, really ingrained and invested in community, we're going to examine all of those ways. Because also these systems that we're talking about, and specific to name them, like capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, they thrive on when people are alone. They thrive in isolation. So when we come into community and we're going to work together, we're going to share resources, we're going to care for one another, for one another's children as well.
That's radical.
That's radical. And when I say radical, the root of the word, or the etymology of the word radical, is actually root. It means the origin, what's essential. So actually, when we're talking about this radical idea, it's actually going back to the way we lived, the way that ancient cultures lived in harmony. So that's my vision for the world. I think we can transform so much by truly living in communities. So it's just a question that I'm personally always asking myself, and always trying to cultivate within the communities that I have created. So, and this goes in with community, and this goes to also seeing the different needs. And that's one of the reasons I created Black Girls Breathe, because I saw there are different needs that weren't being met in the wellness space. So it has the community aspect and also addressing those needs too. And I think that's what community does, because within the community, there are people who don't have the same access. There's young people, there's elderly people. However, we don't just toss them away, kind of like in society now. If you're a mother, you get tossed away. You're like, oh, okay, you're not really doing much. If you're an elderly person, oh, you're about to die anyway. There's a very disposable quality in the society now with people. And when it's community, no one is disposable. Everyone is just as important.
And how do you think we should, and I think the work that you're doing in the world speaks to this, but collectively and on a wider scale, how do you think we can begin to reincorporate that community ethic and investing in each other in a way where some of these more modern senses of being and communing with each other, where people aren't as valued and people are perceived as being disposable, how do we work to overcome some of these experiences?
Yeah, I think part of it is having these discussions. But then not only having these discussions like you and I, but having these discussions with our neighbors and just being like, you know what, I want to get to know you better. You're my neighbor. And to see and say, I really value, I want to create community. This is this is the vision that I have. Is this something that's important to you? And they might say, yes, yay. Or they might say, oh, not really. And it's going to be okay. But I think being vulnerable, right? And because it can be really vulnerable. I remember I was downtown in our area, and I ran into my neighbor and I asked her, oh, can you give me a ride back? Because my husband and I, we share a car, and that's weird, right? But we share a car, and we don't want to put out more exhaust, and that we're trying to share a car for as long as possible. We've been sharing a car for many years now. So I didn't have a car, and my neighbor was there, and I was like, oh, can you give me a ride back home? That seems like a simple thing. However, it seems reasonable, but actually we're taught not to ask for help. We're taught, oh, if you do that, the person's going to think you don't have money, or what's going on with her? Why doesn't she have, whatever the stories that we tell ourselves. And those stories stem from capitalism, and they keep us separate. So vulnerability in terms of when you need help, instead of even paying all the time for support, can you help others, ask for support, and then help others within the community without there being all these additional requirements? Or oh, okay, it has to be a money exchange. Everything has to be a money exchange, when so many times, my mom, one of the things that she couldn't understand, because she's from Haiti, I grew up, I was born there. I was raised in New York City, but she couldn't understand the exchange of money here, because she would just do something for someone and they would want to pay her. And it's just oh, this is what I do. And so there was just this weird dynamic of her
everything
feeling everything is transactional. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So everything doesn't have to be transactional. Just because, if I bring over banana bread from my neighbor, that doesn't mean next week she needs to bring me over anything.
Right.
She doesn't have to. So taking out transactions from our from our interactions, everything is not about a transaction.
Right. And it starts with how we're interacting with each other on a day-to-day basis, as you said. I think that there's so much that we are doing unconsciously that has just been transmitted to us through media, through culture, through our parents, through our peers, that we're going to have to intentionally begin to deprogram from and learn new ways of interacting and new ways of being that are more rooted in that unity consciousness, that community ethic that you spoke about, which is at odds with capitalism and patriarchy. But it takes initiating these different kinds of conversations.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because when you have these conversations and a lot of this operates below the surface, and people might feel it, but don't have the language to express it. Like when you say like, yeah, that's what's been going on. You finally put words to what I've been experiencing. So that's why it's important to have these conversations. And I'm so grateful for you for, number one, inviting me, but regardless, for having these conversations, because it gives language, being able to communicate and give words to what we're experiencing, then is able to, it's like a channel to healing. And it is healing within itself.
Can be healing and can be such an invitation for folks who may be looking for these conversations, but they may not be happening within their workplace, their school, their community, their environment. So kind of blowing open the doors to allow these conversations to become more pervasive. And a question that I'm asking each of the guests is just to share what being more connected means to you.
What being more connected? It's coming back to the word community. And community is being connected to others. And then, however, in order to have that connection with others, there has to be a deep sense of connection within myself or oneself. So it's not connecting from the space of trying to, because it's needy, meaning when I say needy, it's coming from a wounding place, a place of woundedness. And sometimes, literally, if you literally have a wound and you need help, you're coming from a space of woundedness. But what I mean is that it's not coming from, I'm expecting the person to fix a part of me when I'm entering community. So I think it starts, being connected starts, number one, being connected within to higher power, whatever you want to call it, God, universe, source, nature, divine, however it comes out. And then from that overflowing cup, connecting to others and being able to give to others. And some people may not, I don't expect everyone to have an overflowing cup, because depending on the circumstances, they may not. However, if I'm modeling, what I want to model is for them to have an overflowing cup at some point.
Yes, and to be that source of light and to be a guide for others who are drawn to your magnetic message. And how can people stay connected to you if they want to get connected to some of your amazing meditation, breath work, manifestation work? Where can they go?
Well, the best place to go is my website, and that's theresecator.com, ThereseCator.com. And I know you're going to have it linked. And when they sign up, they'll immediately receive a meditation So if you want to sign up, you'll immediately receive a meditation, but also they'll be the first to know if I'm hosting an event. I host events, in-person circles. And then I host sometimes challenges, free challenges, and I do free workshops. So if you want to know about any of those, that's the place to go. And I also hang out on Instagram. That's like where I really like hanging out.
Nice.
So I'm at Thérèse Cator, ThereseCator on Instagram. So I know you're going to have it linked, but those are the two best places to find me.
Perfect. And thank you so much for tuning in to this interview with the Be More Connected Summit. We hope to see you again tomorrow. Thanks, Therese.
Thank you.